A Spirit's Last Stand, the Shaman's Choice, Chapter 1. The battlefield was drowned in silence, broken only by the whisper of the morning wind. The ground was soaked with blood, its stench heavy in the air. Mangled bodies lay scattered across the scoured earth, their crimson banners fluttering weakly in the dawn light. Even sun was rising red, and the fog that clung to the field seemed tinged with red, as though the war itself had stained the sky. Through this wasteland walked a woman, an old shaman wrapped in faded robes, her staff tapping softly against the broken soil. Walking slow and steady, you could feel the old time's power on her slow movement. She was old, but looking younger than her age, but her eyes was dull and carrying the weight of the things she saw in her all life. Behind her trailed a small girl, no older than 10, carrying a bundle of herbs and cloth with ropes. Together they moved slowly, checking with the tip of eye at each fallen warrior. Sometimes the woman would kneel on a warrior, place her hand gently on the fallen warrior's chest, and after a moment of stillness, move on. None stirred. None breathed. Battlefield was mirror of hell. Blood that's out of bodies made a small lake at the pathway. Ripped body parts of warriors, gore, and smell was unbearable. Crowns having their time with the dead bodies. You could hear the rasp bites on the bodies while they are having their food. This was the war. After the death, it was not even important why they fight for. They were dead now, and nature was taking its part to feed the rest. In this scenery, it was surprising how calm and slow Shaman was moving without sign of disgust or fear. Clearly little girl was having courage from her, or she would run away without even looking back. Her eyes was full of fear, but still keeping herself under control, and have a relief of knowing everyone is dead and nothing is moving except the crowns and rats. Even the wind and smell of the wind was bothering and saying they shouldn't be here. Then, some distance ahead, the shaman halted, her clouded eyes fixed on a lone figure lying among the heaps of the dead. Unlike the others, his body trembled faintly with breath. His wounds were terrible, deep gashes across his chest and arms, while others had an armor. This one didn't have anything to protect him, his blood soaking into the earth. His long hair, tied on the back, was matted with dirt and gore. The shaman knelt beside him, her hand brushing lightly against his brow. She felt the faint rhythm of life still clinging to him. She lifted her head and gave a subtle sign to the girl. "He is almost gone," the girl whispered, her voice sharp with doubt. "It is pointless to save him." But the old woman did not answer. Her silence was resolute, her hands already moving to prepare herbs and bindings. She saw what the girl could not, the strange presence that clung to this man, a spirit of strength that was not of this place. He was not belong among the fallen. As dawn broke over the field of the dead, the shaman worked quietly, determined to draw this lone warrior back from the edge of death. The girl hesitated, her small hands tightening around the bundle of herbs. Her scarred face hardened, the wound over her eye pulling her expression into something harsher than a child should be. She crouched beside the shaman, though her voice trembled. "You waste your time, old mother," she muttered. "He will die like the rest, let the crows take him." The shaman did not answer. Her fingers pressed against the man's chest, not only to still the bleeding, but to feel the spirit within him. Faint, flickering, yet stubbornly burning against the pull of death. The old woman's lips parted in a whisper of words, in no tongue the child understood. The hair around them shifted as though the crimson fog itself listened. The girl shivered and turned her eyes away, staring at the broken field. She hated that sound. Hated the dead, the warriors, the blood. But most of all, she hated the way the shaman seemed to find hope where none should exist. The man's breath rattled. His lips moved, shaping broken fragments of words. "Were no chains." The girl leaned closer despite herself. His eyes opened for the briefest moment, clouded, unfocused, yet burning with a strange fire. She pulled back with a hiss, clutching her bundle tighter. "He is a slave," she spat. "I know that look, I've seen it before. He has killed, same as the rest." The shaman finally lifted her gaze to meet the girl's. Her voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of stone. "No," she said. "This one was taken. His chains were not of iron, but of fate. He does not belong here." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the child's face. She looked again at the warrior bleeding into the soil, then at the sky stained red by dawn. The shaman's hands did not stop. She bound wounds, pressed herbs, whispered words that turned the air heavy with unseen presence. The earth around the warrior grew still, as though waiting to see if he would rise or be claimed by the silence forever. The girl shifted uneasily, watching the blood seep from the man's wounds and mingle with the red soil. His breathing was shallow, ragged, but it was still there. She hated that he clung to life when so many others had not. "We cannot carry him," she said sharply, clutching her bundle tighter. "He will slow us down. He will bleed to death before the next hill." The shaman's hand pressed one last strip of cloth against the man's chest before she answered. Her tone was calm, unshaken, like stone that had endured storms. "Then he will die on the road, but not here." The girl's scarred eye narrowed, anger rising. Why him? The field is full of bodies, but you choose this one. He could have killed my father, my mother, my brother." Her voice cracked raw with the memory. "He looks no different from them." The shaman placed her staff in the dirt and rose slowly. Her gaze lingered on the warrior, then on the child. "Because I can see what you cannot." The girl's fists trembled, but she said nothing more. With a bitter grunt, she dropped the bundle to the ground and tore free a length of rope. Together, they began to bind makeshift straps around the warrior's limp form. His head lolled to one side, his hair falling across his bloodied face. For a moment, he looked no more alive than the corpses beside him. The girl avoided his eyes as she tied the knots. Her voice was low, venomous. "If he rises and turns on us, I will cut his throat myself." The shaman's reply was quiet, but firm. "If he rises, child, it will not be against us." With a heave, the girl slipped the rope across her shoulder, straining under the unexpected weight. The shaman took the other side, steadying the burden. Step by slow step, they lifted the fallen warrior from the bed of corpses. The crimson fog swirled faintly around them as they began their march out of the field of the dead. She straightened slowly, wiping the blood from her hands onto the hem of her faded robe. Her gaze swept the dead field, lingering on the distant tree line where the mist grew thicker. "Go," she said at last, her voice steady. "Find the mule. If it still lingers near the stream, we will need it." The girl blinked, startled. "You would waste our beast on him." "He cannot walk, and we cannot drag him across the earth without leaving a trail," the shaman replied. "The two poles bound together, we will lash him to a sled. The animal will bear the weight." The girl hesitated, her scarred brow furrowed in anger, but she obeyed. She turned and ran toward the edge of the battlefield, her small form weaving between corpses and broken banners. The shaman remained at the warrior's side, placing one hand on his chest again. She felt the faint rhythm still fighting within him, fragile but unyielding. Her eyes softened for the first time, though her lips held no smile. "You are not yet meant for the earth," she murmured. Moments later, the girl returned, leading a tired mule with a rope around its neck. The creature snorted nervously, refusing at first to step closer to the blood-soaked soil. With a firm tug and whispered word, the shaman calmed it, her staff tapping once against the ground. Together, they bound two long branches into a rough frame, lashing them into the shape of a narrow V. Strips of cloth and rope made a crude bedding across the poles. With gritted teeth, the girl helped lift the warrior's limp body onto the carrier, strapping him tight so he would not slide free. At last, the mule was harnessed to the frame. The shaman laid her hand on its flank, whispering soft words until the beast stilled and accepted its burden. The girl stood back, breathing hard, her face pale with disgust. "He weighs more than he's worth." The shaman adjusted her staff and began to walk, leading the mule forward. "Then we will see if the spirits agree." The mule pulled reluctantly, hooves squelching in the mire of blood and mud. The crude sled scraped across the ground, carrying the warrior's weight with a low groan of wood against soil. His body swayed with each step, bound tight, his face half hidden beneath the fall of his blood-matted hair. The girl walked a few paces behind, her eyes darting across the field as though the dead might yet rise. She flinched when a crow cawed overhead, its wings beating slow circles above the corpses. The smell was worse now, as the sun climbed higher and warmed the gore. "Why must we drag him from here?" she muttered, her voice sharp in the silence. "Better to leave him. His kind only bring more war." The shaman said nothing. Her staff tapped against the earth, steady as a heartbeat. The girl scowled, clutching her bundle tighter, and looked away. The path out of the battlefield wound between toppled banners and broken spears. Pools of blood gleamed in the light, their surfaces rippling when the mule's hooves disturbed them. Rats scattered at their approach, dragging scraps of flesh back into the fog. As they climbed a rise of broken earth, the girl cast one last look over the sea of corpses. From above, the field seemed endless, a red ocean stretching to the horizon. Her stomach turned. At the crest, the shaman paused. She raised her gaze to the sky, where the fog thinned and the first clear rays of dawn broke through. Her lips moved soundlessly, as if in quiet prayer. The girl tugged at his sleeve impatiently. "Come, let's go before the stench eats through our skin." The shaman lowered her staff, eyes narrowing at the tree line beyond. The forest loomed dark and still, its shadow like a wall against the bleeding dawn. "Do not be so eager, child," she murmured. "The dead do not trouble us, it is the living we must fear." The girl frowned, not understanding. But as they descended the ridge and left the battlefield behind, the crimson fog seemed to cling to their backs like a warning that refused to let go. The forest swallowed them slowly. The mule's hooves shifted from wet mud to the softer hush of soil and fallen leaves. Each step of the sled groaned faintly against the ground, dragging the wounded warrior into the shadow of the trees. Behind them, the crimson fog drifted like a ghost at the forest's edge, unwilling to follow but unwilling to release its gaze. The girl breathed easier once the corpses were hidden from sight, though the stench of death clung to her clothes and hair. She rubbed her nose against her sleeve as if to erase the smell. Still, her eyes remained sharp, flicking at every rustle in the undergrowth. It was too quiet. No birdsong, no wind in the branches, only the scrape of wood and the steady tap of the shaman's staff. "Why here?" the girl whispered, her voice low, afraid to disturb the silence. "The woods feel worse than the field." The shaman's clouded eyes lifted to the canopy, where the light barely filtered through. She did not stop walking. "The forest remembers more than men do," she said. "Their wars pass, but the trees they keep the scars." The girl shivered, glancing at the endless trunks rising like pillars around them. She tried to keep her gaze on the mule's swaying back, but her thoughts returned again and again to the man lying bound upon the sled. His shallow breathing was the only proof he still lingered on the edge of life. "How long will you keep him?" she asked suddenly, bitterness sharp in her tone. "Until he dies in our arms." The shaman's reply was slow, steady, unyielding. "Until he shows me why he still breathes." The girl clenched her jaw, said no more. The path wound deeper into the forest, each step pulling them further from the light of dawn. And though the air grew cooler beneath the trees, the child could not shake the feeling that something unseen was walking with them, matching their pace just beyond the shadows. The path narrowed as the forest thickened, roots clawing out from the soil like twisted bones. The mule trudged on, its breath misting in the cool air, dragging the weight of the warrior with each groan of the sled. Then came the sound low, steady, rippling through the stillness like a warning drum. The girl froze, her hand tightening around the bundle as her chest. Between the trees, eyes glimmered. "Yellow. Many. Wolves," she whispered, her voice thin with fear. Her scarred hand reached for a stone at her side. The shaman did not stop walking. Her staff tapped once against the earth, her pace unbroken. "Do not raise your hand, child." The wolves emerged from the shadows, silent and lean, their fur dark as the forest soil. They did not snarl. They did not close in. They only followed, padding beside the mule, their eyes fixed on the shaman as though they recognized her. The girl stumbled to the shaman's side, whispering harshly, "They will tear us apart." But the shaman's face was calm, her clouded gaze never leaving the path ahead. "They will not harm us. They walk where the spirits bid them, for now they're our company." The child swallowed hard, eyes wide as the wolves paced them on both sides, silent as shadows. Their presence made her heart pound, but slowly she realized they were not hunters tonight. They were sentries. The forest deepened. Hours passed like days, the girl's legs trembling beneath her, the mule's breath heavy. Only the wolves remained constant, their glowing eyes a steady ring around them. At last, as dusk began to seep through the canopy, the path opened into a hollow between hills. There, half buried in the earth, rose the faint outline of a dwelling, stone and timber sunk into the side of the hill, more cave than house. Its doorway yawned low and dark, framed by tangled roots and moss. The girl exhaled a shaky breath of relief, though the wolves did not vanish. They lingered at the edges of the hollow, watching with unblinking eyes. The shaman raised her staff and tapped it once against the soil before the threshold. The sound echoed strangely, as if the hill itself stirred in answer. "Home," she said simply, and stepped forward. The sled scraped against stone as they pulled the wounded man toward the low doorway. The mule snorted, shaking its head, unwilling to go further into the hollow. With a pat to its flank, the shaman unfastened the harness, leaving the animal to rest outside among the moss and shadows. The wolves had vanished into the trees, silent as they had appeared. The girl hesitated at the threshold. Her scarred brow furrowed as she stared at the limp figure they dragged. "Not inside," she muttered. "He does not belong here." The shaman's clouded eyes flicked toward her, calm but firm. "He breathes still, that is enough." The girl's lips pressed into a thin line, but she obeyed, helping shift the warrior from the sled. Together they pulled him across the stone floor into the dim shelter of the dwelling. Inside, the air was cool, smelling faintly of herbs, earth, and smoke. Roots coiled down from the ceiling like ribs, while shelves of clay jars and dried plants lined the walls. In the center lay a shallow fire pit, cold ashes waiting to be stirred back to life. The shaman guided the warrior onto a pile of straw and woven mats at the far wall, his blood already soaking the cloth beneath him. She knelt, checking his breath once more, then turned to the child. "Fire," she said. "We will need warmth and water." The girl scowled but dropped her bundle onto the floor. With a sigh, she crouched at the pit, arranging kindling with quick, sharp motions. Her hands trembled not from inexperience, but from the newness of the strange year they had carried into their refuge. She muttered under her breath as she struck the flint. "He should be with the others, buried under the field, not here, not with us." The shaman ignored her protests, unrolling fresh cloths, her staff laid carefully at her side. She spoke as if reciting a truth the child could not yet see. "There are times the spirits whisper, child, times when the living are claimed for reasons we do not choose. This man is not for the crows." The fire sparked to life, small flames licking at the dry wood. The girl sat back, her face lit in red and gold, shadows hiding the bitterness in her eyes. The shaman nodded once. "Now fetch water, and whatever roots or grains remain in the jar we will eat before the work begins." The girl rose reluctantly, glancing once more at the man's pale, bloodied face before turning toward the back alcove of the dwelling. Her footsteps echoed faintly in the hollow, leaving the shaman alone with the wounded stranger. For a moment, the shaman pressed her hand gently to his chest. His heart still beat, faint but steady, refusing to yield. "You were not chosen to die today," she murmured. "So we will see what you are meant for." The girl returned with the clay jar cradled against her chest, setting it down with a thud beside the fire. She knelt and pulled free a handful of dried roots, the earthy scent rising as she broke them into pieces. From a pouch she shook out a measure of coarse grains, letting them fall into a pot of water balanced over the flames. The shaman worked in silence at the warrior's side, rinsing his wounds with what little clean water remained. Her movements were slow but precise, her eyes dull yet unwavering, as though every cut and bruise told her something hidden. The girl stirred the pot, her jaw tight. The firelight danced across her scar, pulling it into a deeper shadow across her face. "He will eat our food," she muttered, her voice edged with bitterness. "He will drink our water, and when he is strong again, he will take more. That is what men do." The shaman did not raise her head. "That is what some men do." The girl shot her a hard look, but the old woman's expression was unreadable. Frustration burned in her chest. She wanted to shout, to demand why this stranger was worth more than her fears, but her voice broke only into silence. The stew began to boil, filling the dwelling with the smell of roots and smoke. The girl leaned close, letting the steam wash over her face, hiding the sting in her eyes. The shaman finally spoke again, her tone soft, but carrying a weight that settled into the hollow like stone. "You carry scars that were given, child, scars that were forced, but not all who breathe wear the same guilt." The girl turned away, unable to answer. She ladled the stew into 2 small bowls, setting them near the fire. The third portion, thinner and smaller, she set aside without looking toward the man who still hovered on the edge of death. The shaman rose stiffly, taking her bowl. She sat across from the child, the fire between them, shadows stretching across the earthen walls. For a time, the only sound was the crackle of flames and the low whistle of the boiling pot. When the bowls were empty, the shaman set hers aside. She drew her staff closer, resting both hands upon it as if grounding herself. "It is time," she said at last. Tonight we see whether he will remain among the living or join the silence he escape. The girl froze, her eyes darting to the man's still body, pale in the firelight. The shaman laid a final cloth over the warrior's chest, pressing her palm lightly to his brow. His fever still burned, but his breath was steady enough to endure the night. He rests now, she murmured, her voice low but certain. The morning will tell us more. The girl sat cross-legged near the fire, arms wrapped tight around her knees. Her eyes flicked nervously to the dark entrance, where the forest loomed beyond. There is something out there, the shaman said, turning her clouded gaze toward the doorway. A weight in the air, old and restless. Keep your senses sharp, child. Not all dangers walk on legs. The girl nodded, though uneasily. She dragged her blanket into the corner, arranging her small bundle as a pillow. She kept her scarred face turned toward the fire, watching the old woman move. The shaman remained upright, staff in hand. She placed herbs upon the coals, and then tendrils of smoke curled into the hollow, sharp and bitter. The flames hissed, their glow shifting to a deeper hue. Her lips began to whisper words not meant for common ears. The girl watched, her eyelids heavy. She had seen the shaman do this before, rituals to ease the passage of the dead, but never after such a slaughter. The smoke thickened, carrying the weight of countless unseen presences. The child's breathing slowed, her body sinking into the warm blanket. Her eyes fluttered, struggling to resist, but the rhythm of the shaman's chant lulled her. At last, sleep claimed her, pulling her into dreams she could not hold. The shaman was left alone. Her voice deepened, steady as the earth, guiding the lost spirits of the battlefield into silence, one by one. The dwelling filled with a presence heavy but not cruel, as if unseen figures stood in the shadows, listening. Then her body stilled. Her head bowed, her staff trembling faintly in her hands. She slipped into the trance that had carried her through many years, beyond the walls of the cave, beyond the forest, beyond even the blood-stained dawn. Visions pressed upon her, flames devouring villages, banners tearing in storms, men's screams followed by the roar of war. And at the heart of it a shadow without form, vast and hungry, spreading its hand across the land. The shaman gasped, her chest heaving as if the vision itself had struck her down. Her dull eyes widened, clouded not by age but by terror. Chaos is coming, she whispered into the silence. And with that choice, her grip on the staff tightened until her knuckles whitened. She felt the presence of the warrior lying behind her, still breathing, still chained to fate. And for the first time in many years, fear settled in her heart. Warning seeped into the cave like a reluctant guest, pale light spilling across the earthen floor. The warrior had not moved. His chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, broken by low groans, the murmur of dreams locked behind clenched teeth. The girl frowned at him, uneasy, then busied herself with her tasks. She fetched water from the stream, gathered sticks for the fire, and scattered feed for the mule tied beyond the trees. She stayed outside longer than she needed, the air damp and cold as it was easier to bear than the silence of the cave. The shaman watched her go but did not call her back. Her own thoughts were heavy, the visions of blood and chaos still gnawing in the corners of her mind. She set herbs to dry by the fire, whispering prayers over them, though her eyes often drifted toward the forest. The day crawled by. The girl lingered outdoors, humming faintly to herself, though every sound in the forest made her shoulders twitch. She kept her scarred face hidden from the open path, hiding in small chores, gathering branches, pulling moss from stones. When the sun sank low, the warrior stirred again. His body shivered with another groan, his fingers tightening into fists. His lips moved as if speaking to ghosts. The sound was faint but unsettling, like the voice of someone half buried. The shaman's gaze sharpened. Outside, the girl paused, glancing back toward the cave. The forest air had grown heavy, still, as though something vast watched from the trees. She shivered, unaware that the silence was not emptiness but the first breath of hunters drawing near. The shaman felt it. Her staff tightened in her grip. Somewhere beyond the trees, unseen, the night was shifting. The night was heavy, the fire in the hollow burning low. The shaman sat still as stone, her senses stretched into the forest. The warrior's faint groans from the mat filled the silence until another sound pierced the night. A scream. High, sharp, terrified, too young to belong anywhere on a battlefield. The girl. The shaman rose instantly, staff in hand. She stepped to the doorway, clouded eyes narrowing. Beyond the trees, voices barked orders, rough laughter mixed with the girl's cries. Soldiers. They had tracked the marks of the sled. The shaman did not rush forward. Instead, she closed her eyes, sinking into the stillness of the earth. Her lips moved soundlessly as her staff pressed deep into the soil. The air around her shifted, darker, colder. Out in the forest clearing, the girl struggled in the dirt, her wrists bound by coarse rope. Soldiers towered over her, jeering. One raised a torch, another his blade. Then the shadows moved. From between the trees stepped figures, black, jagged, and human only in outline. Armor cracked, swords rusted, eyes glowing faintly like embers in ash. The girl froze, breath caught in her throat as the night itself seemed to give birth to warriors. The soldiers turned, startled, their laughter dying in their throats. One cursed. Another swung his sword wildly at the figures. Still met nothing. And then screams tore through the forest as the shadows struck back. Men fell, their cries cut short, blood spilling on the earth. Those who raised their weapons were dragged into the dark. The one who had lifted his hand against the girl was seized by two shadowed warriors, his body ripped apart like cloth. The girl screamed again, thrashing against her ropes, terror flooding her eyes. She did not understand. She could only watch as the forest became a nightmare. Some soldiers fled, crashing through the undergrowth in panic. Others did not rise again. Far behind, unseen among the trees, the shaman watched in silence. Her staff still pressed into the earth, her face pale in the torchlight's distant flicker. She did not speak, she did not reveal herself. Only her eyes, dull, weary, and grim, witnessed what she had called. When it was done, the shadows slipped back into the trees, dissolving like smoke. The forest grew quiet once more, leaving only corpses, blood, and a trembling child in the dirt. The shaman turned away, vanishing into the black of the woods, her presence never revealed. Dawn crept through the cracks of the cave, washing the walls in pale light. The fire had dwindled to embers. The girl slept curled against the shaman's side, her breath uneven, still shaken from the night before. The shaman's gaze, however, was on the war. He stood again, his body trembling with effort. His eyes flickered beneath closed lids, then finally cracked open. The dull haze of fever blurred his sight at first, but slowly the world came into focus, the dim cave, the smoke-stained ceiling, and two figures close by. His breath hitched. A child. A woman. Neither wore armor. Neither raised a blade. But the air around them was heavy, charged, as though the earth itself held its breath. The warrior tried to move. Pain lanced through his body, and a broken groan escaped his lips. He fell back onto the mat, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temples. His lips moved, shaping words he could not force out. The shaman leaned closer, her hand gentle on his shoulder, yet her eyes sharp and measuring. "You have woken," she said softly. "But you are not yet strong. Do not waste your strength, listen." His gaze met hers, clouded eyes staring into his as though she could read the depths of him. "You were left for dead," she continued. "We carried you from the field. Others will come hunting. You must rest. You must endure." He swallowed hard, fighting for a voice, but only a rasp left his throat. His eyes flicked toward the girl, who sat up groggily, staring at him with fear and mistrust. Then back to the shaman. Her words pressed against him like stone. She was not asking, not questioning. She was giving truth, and something deep within him, though battered and uncertain, agreed. He shut his eyes, nodding faintly, surrendering to the weight of her will. The shaman placed her hand on his chest, steadying his breath. "Good, rest. The road ahead will demand all that you have left." The warrior's body sank again into exhaustion, but his mind no longer drifted aimlessly. He felt that something had changed around him. He was not dead. And that was enough to keep him breathing. The cave was silent but for the shallow breaths of the sleeping girl and the faint rasp of the warriors. The shaman moved slowly among them, gathering the remaining herbs and supplies, her staff tapping softly against the earthen floor. Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the trees, spilling faint streaks of gold across the hollow. The air was sharp, cold, carrying the scent of wet soil and distant smoke. The shaman's eyes flicked to the tree line, alert but calm. The warrior shifted, eyes half open, watching her from the mat. Though weak, his senses were sharpening. He could feel the subtle shift in the forest, the lingering presence of the dead from the battlefield, the faint pulse of energy that clung to the shaman and the girl. His body protested as he tried to sit, muscles stiff and aching, but he forced himself upright. Every movement sent a jolt of pain through him, yet a strange clarity followed. He was alive. He was here. And he knew, somehow, that he was needed. The shaman turned toward him, her gaze steady. "We leave at first light. You must endure. You cannot yet speak, but you understand. You will follow, or you will not survive." He nodded faintly, wincing as pain flared through his chest and arms. The gesture was weak, but it was agreement. His mind grasped the words without sound. The girl, now awake, kept her distance. She watched him suspiciously, the memory of last night's terror still fresh in her mind. Yet even she could sense the change in him, the subtle presence that marked him as different from the men they had left behind. The shaman moved between them, touching the warrior gently to steady him, then gesturing toward the pack supplies. "Prepare yourself. Today will not forgive weakness." He obeyed, every movement deliberate, forced, a reminder that his body was not yet his own. And yet, as he looked from the girl to the shaman, a faint understanding passed through him. They had saved him, and he would repay that debt in the only way he could, by surviving. Outside, the forest waited, silent and watchful, as the hollow began to stir with the first movements of life and the promise of danger beyond the trees. The first light of morning touched the hollow, pale and hesitant, as if wary of what had happened the night before. The girl had packed the few supplies they could carry, her movements quick, intense, glancing constantly toward the trees. The warrior struggled to his feet, each motion a battle against pain and exhaustion. His long hair clung to his sweat-soaked brow, and the deep gashes across his arms reminded him how fragile his survival still was. Yet, something in his chest pushed him onward, a faint spark of purpose he could not name. The shaman stepped ahead, staff in hand, eyes scanning the forest for threats. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a warning. She had called upon the dead once already, the forest still remembered. "Stay close," she instructed, her voice low, calm, carrying weight without anger. "Do not fall behind. Do not speak unless necessary." The girl flinched at the command, but nodded. Her mistrust of the warrior had not faded, yet she understood implicitly that they could not afford hesitation. The path ahead was narrow, winding through dense undergrowth and twisted roots. The mule carried their scant supplies, stumbling carefully over stones and fallen branches. Birds remained silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The warrior's eyes darted from shadow to shadow, sensing the shift in the air. The energy of the battlefield lingered faintly in the soil, the remnants of what had been called forth the night before brushing against his mind. He did not understand it yet, but he felt it. And he knew instinctively that following them is the only choice. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the soft tap of the shaman's staff and the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The girl occasionally glanced back, scanning for signs of pursuit. Her fear had not left her, but a cautious curiosity had begun to flicker about the warrior and about the what was that shadows in the forest. Why they didn't touch her? Where was the shaman when she reached cave? The forest slowly thinned as the morning light strengthened, revealing the rough shapes of hills in the distance. Beyond them lay open land, but with it came exposure. The shaman's eyes narrowed. Danger would not let them pass freely. And somewhere deep within the woods, the echoes of last night's chaos still lingered, reminding them that the world beyond the hollow was vast, violent, and waiting. The journey had begun. The three moved slowly, too slowly for safety. The warrior's steps were halting, each one an agony of pain and exhaustion. His body still betrayed him, and the shaman adjusted her pace to keep him upright, her hand at his back, her staff tapping the ground in silent rhythm. The girl carried the smaller pack, glancing constantly to the rear. Her fear had not left. She flinched at every distant sound, every crack of twig or rustle of leaves. "How far do we go?" she asked at last, her voice trembling. The shaman shook her head, her clouded eyes scanning the horizon. "I do not know. There is no path that is truly safe. We move only to survive." The warrior, though still groaning with pain, understood something instinctively. He had survived the battlefield. He had survived the night. And now, even in this weakened state, he knew he could not stop. He could not linger. "The soldiers will not forgive their losses," the shaman continued, her voice slow, deliberate. "They will hunt anyone who carries the marks of the dead." She glanced at the warrior, well marked now, and this child as she looked at the girl, whose hands clenched the straps of her pack. "They will not forgive her courage. We have no choice but to move." The girl swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, to demand a plan, but she knew there was none. The land around them was wild, uncharted to her. Every step forward was a step into uncertainty. The warrior stumbled again, collapsing briefly against the shaman's shoulder. Pain twisted his features, but he forced himself upright. He could feel the energy in the forest shifting, restless, and the echo of the dead from the battlefield still lingered faintly in the soil. Even with the shaman's guidance, their pace was slow. Every hill, every fallen tree, every rough patch of ground seemed to stretch into miles. Yet moving was the only choice. To stop was to die or to be captured by the soldiers that trailed them like shadows. The girl, watching the warriors struggle, felt a conflicted mix of fear and reluctant respect. He was broken, yet something in him refused surrender. She kept her eyes forward, letting her fear turn into silent vigilance. And so they moved, step by painstaking step, into the unknown, driven by the harsh certainty of survival and the knowledge that what had already happened behind them would not let them return. The forest thinned into a rugged valley, the morning light stretching long shadows over jagged rocks and fallen trees. Every step became a struggle. The warrior's legs trembled, his wounds flaring with the exertion, forcing him to lean heavily on the shaman's steadying arm. His breaths came in ragged gasps, and sweat mixed with dried blood on his skin, glinting in the pale sunlight. The girl stayed slightly behind, her small pack heavy on her shoulders. Her eyes darted from the valley to the surrounding trees, watching every flicker of movement. The memory of the shattered warriors last night still haunted her. She had no words, only the fear that the soldiers would somehow follow, and that this fragile moment of survival could shatter with a single misstep. "Keep moving," the shaman said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of command without harshness. "Slow, steady, but unbroken. Do not pause where danger could reach you." The warrior gritted his teeth, forcing himself to step forward, even as every emotion sent shards of pain through his chest and arms. Deep in him, he felt something stir, a faint awareness of the energy around him, the pulse of life and death mingling in the valley, the echo of spirits lingering from the battlefield. He did not understand it yet, but he knew it marked him as different, as needed. The girl's steps faltered as a loose stone shifted underfoot. She glanced nervously toward the shaman, who only nodded once, steadying her gaze, then continued forward. The valley was long, rough, and unwelcoming. Every ridge and fallen tree stretched the journey, making time drag, making every step a test of endurance. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, beating down on their backs. The warrior's groans became more frequent, but he did not stop. He knew, somewhere deep inside, that they depended on him. To falter now would be to fail not just himself, but the girl and the shaman who had saved him from death. Even as the valley narrowed and the forest seemed to close around them again, the trio pressed on. The path offered no comfort, only the hard reminder that survival required motion, vigilance, and endurance. By midday, the valley opened slightly, revealing a sparse, rocky woodland. Sunlight filtered in jagged slashes through the trees, catching on the warrior's wet-streaked skin. His steps were tentative, every movement to struggle against his body's protest. The shaman worked ahead, staff tapping the ground in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Her eyes constantly scanned the forest, not for enemies she could see, but for the invisible threads of energy that warned her of lingering threats. She paused briefly at a stone outcrop, crouching to touch the earth, sensing for residual spirits from the battlefield. The warrior followed, feeling both the weight of his own weakness and the faint pulse of something unseen. The energy in the air shifted subtly, brushing against his mind in ways he could not yet understand. He did not speak, his throat still raw, his lips trembling with the effort of trying. The girl walked slightly ahead of him at times, her small stature making her a quick, alert scout. Yes, she kept glancing back, scanning for danger. Fear and mistrust warred within her. The warrior was still a stranger, a man of unknown origin whose presence had already brought death to their doorstep. The shaman's voice, soft and precise, cut through the tense air. "The path ahead is uncertain. We move not toward a place, but away from those who would see us fall, step by step, endurance by endurance." The warrior nodded faintly, wincing as pain shot through his torso with every breath. His awareness sharpened despite his agony. He could feel the subtle shifts in the forest, the faint tremor of distant movement, the whispers of life and death. Though weak, he understood he could not stop. He must walk, must endure. The girl's hands tightened around her pack. She knew the soldier's hunt had not ended. Every sound, every rustle of leaves reminded her of what could happen if they faltered. Yet, watching the warrior struggle, she felt a reluctant admiration. Despite his broken body, he carried something essential, a presence that demanded they follow. The sun reached its zenith, casting long, angled shadows across the ground. The valley stretched before them, harsh and unforgiving. Every step demanded focus, every breath carried the weight of the past night's horrors. As afternoon approached, the forest began to thin again, revealing jagged hills and rocky outcrops. The warrior's pace slowed almost to a crawl. His legs shook with effort, every breath drew fire through his chest. The shaman adjusted her movements to match his, offering her hand when he faltered, whispering encouragement in tones low enough to soothe, yet commanding enough to push him onward. The girl followed closely, tense and alert. Her eyes constantly scanned the horizon for movement, for any sign of soldiers or predators. Every snapping twig made her flinch, every bird that soared in the branches overhead made her heart race. The shaman stopped at the edge of a narrow ridge. She crouched, pressing her palm to the soil, listening to the subtle vibrations beneath her feet. "We have no certainty," she said softly. "Only the way before us and the strength to endure it. Every step is survival." The warrior sank briefly to a rock, wincing as his body screamed in protest. Pain twisted his features, yet something within him hardened. He could feel the faint pulse of energy in the surrounding forest, the lingering presence of the battlefield, the weight of the spirits the shaman had called forth. He did not fully understand it, but instinct told him it marked him as different. The girl's mistrust lingered, but she followed nonetheless. She had seen the power unleashed last night. She had felt the terror. And despite the fear, she could not deny that the warrior, fragile as he was, had survived where others would have perished. The shaman rose, brushing dust from her robes. "Prepare yourselves, the path grows more treacherous with every mile. We move, or we die here." The warrior forced himself upright once more, leaning on the shaman's shoulder. Step by slow step, breath by shallow breath, they moved onward. The valley stretched behind them, the memory of shadows and death lingering in the soil, while the unknown hills ahead promised danger, endurance, and the fragile hope of survival. Evening began to creep over the landscape, staining the sky with muted gold and crimson. The forest grew sparser, wind carrying a faint chill through the narrow ridges. The warrior's pace had slowed further, agony etched into every movement. He leaned heavily on the shaman, each step a test of will. The girl stumbled behind, burdened with her small pack and the weight of worry. Her eyes never left the horizon, watching for soldiers, for threats, for anything that might undo the fragile progress they had made. Fear still coursed through her, but a cautious determination had begun to take root. "We cannot linger," the shaman said, voice calm but heavy. "Those who hunt will not forgive delay. Every pause invites pursuit." The warrior's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. Though he could not speak, he understood. He felt the energy in the forest shifting, the distant echo of spirits, the residue of death, the pull of survival. Something deep inside demanded he continue, demanded he endure. The girl finally spoke, voice barely a whisper. Where are we even going?" The shaman did not answer immediately. She scanned the hills, her gaze touching the distant ridges, the paths veiled by shadow and brush. "We move where the living may yet survive," she said at last. "There's no certainty, only the necessity to endure, step by step, mile by mile. We move, or we die." The warrior nodded faintly, grimacing as pain shot through him. He forced himself to take another step. Behind him, the girl adjusted her pack, following the two of them. The forest whispered around them, quiet but watchful. Somewhere far ahead, unseen, the world waited, wild, dangerous, and relentless. And so they pressed onward, slow and weary, each step carrying the weight of survival, fear, and the uncertain path that lay before them. The sun hung low, spilling golden light across the jagged hills and sparse trees. Their shadows stretched long over uneven ground as the trio moved cautiously, scanning the ridges and hollows for a suitable place to rest. The warrior's pace was slow, each step a reminder of his wounds, his body stiff and trembling. Sweat mixed with dried blood along his temples and jaw. He kept his eyes forward, mind alert, sensing the subtle shifts in the forest, though his strength was waning. The girl moved a few paces ahead, scanning the rocks and shallow caves. Her pack was light, yet every step carried the weight of anxiety. She flinched at distant noises, branches snapping under unseen creatures or gusts of wind. Fear lingered in her chest, but she forced herself onward, knowing that stopping could mean death or capture. The shaman walked slightly apart from both, composed and deliberate. Her robe swept lightly against the rocks, staff tapping a measured rhythm against the ground. Though only a few years older than the warrior, she carried the quiet authority of experience and survival. Her beauty was tempered by strength and the knowledge of what the world had become. Her eyes scanned every crevice, every shadow, reading the land like a map of threats and possibilities. After a long pause near a rocky outcrop, she crouched briefly, touching the soil, feeling for disturbances and the energy that lingered from battles past. She straightened, turning her gaze toward the two behind her. "This land, it is broken," she said softly. "Chaos rules here. There is no good or evil as you might imagine, only those who take and those who are taken, the kings, the generals, the soldiers. They do not act from honor or mercy, they act from desire, they act from power." The warrior stopped, settling on a rock to catch his breath. Pain shot through his torso with every shallow inhale, but he listened, absorbing the weight of her words. Though he could not speak, he understood the battlefield, the shadows, the relentless chase. It all fit the pattern she described. The girl lowered her pack to the ground and glanced at him, then at the shaman. "So there's no safe place anywhere?" she asked, voice tight. "Safety is a lie," the shaman replied. "Even here, even in this hollow, we rest only for a moment. The strong will always take, and the weak will always flee. Those who could choose good often choose cruelty instead. For the taste of control, the thrill of dominance, survival demands vigilance and courage, not innocence." The warrior shifted on the rock, grimacing, trying to stand again. His muscles protested, every step painful, yet he rose. He could feel the tension in the valley, the subtle energy of spirits and remnants of death lingering in the soil. Something deep inside urged him forward, reminded him that he was needed, that he could not falter. The girl finally settled near a low boulder, beginning to gather firewood with shaky hands. Her eyes never left the horizon, still wary, still tense, yet a faint understanding had begun to form. Survival here demanded more than strength. It demanded awareness, endurance, and an understanding of the harsh, merciless world they had been thrust into. The shaman knelt nearby, beginning to arrange a small fire pit and sorting the herbs and spices they carried. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though even preparing a meal required respect for the fragile lives around her. The warrior watched quietly, muscles aching, energy low, yet a faint spark of recognition began to stir. They had survived the battlefield, and here, in the dying light of day, survival continued one careful, measured step at a time. The valley was silent but watchful. Even as they prepared to rest, the air carried the faint promise of danger, the reminder that in this world, nothing could be taken for granted. The sun dipped lower, painting the hills in muted gold and shadow. After hours of careful wandering, they spotted a narrow hollow tucked beneath a jagged ridge. It offered only partial shelter, but the shaman judged it enough to spend the night hidden from any wandering eyes. The warrior lowered himself to the ground, wincing as his muscles screamed in protest. He stayed on the edge of the hollow, careful not to collapse fully, each movement slow and deliberate. Pain radiated through his body, but he kept his gaze forward, scanning the distant ridges even as his exhaustion threatened to pull him under. The girl hesitated at the entrance, her small pack at her feet. She shifted from one foot to the other, glancing warily at the hills, at the thin brush, at the hollow that offered them shelter yet no comfort. Fear clung to her like a second skin. She knelt briefly, ranging a few stones to form a small fire pit, her hands shaking slightly as she worked. The shaman stepped closer, her figure calm, deliberate, moving with the quiet confidence of someone used to navigating a dangerous world. She inspected the hollow with careful eyes, noting the jagged rocks and scattered debris. Her movements were efficient, without hurry, without excess, yet every motion conveyed experience and quiet authority. "We rest here for the night," she said, voice steady. "Water and food must wait until we are certain the place is safe, nothing more. We leave at first light." The warrior nodded faintly, though speaking still brought pain. He adjusted himself, trying to find a position that allowed rest without worsening his injuries. The valley beyond, the hollow stretched in muted colors, the late afternoon sun casting long, uneasy shadows. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down, the sense of pursuit, though the forest around them remained still. The girl finally settled near a low rock, glancing repeatedly toward the entrance, listening to every subtle sound, the brush shifting, a distant bird, the wind stirring the leaves. She did not speak. Her mistrust of the warrior remained, though it was tempered by necessity. He had survived where others had died, and for now they needed one another. The shaman gathered a few sticks for a fire, arranging them carefully without haste. She crouched near the hollow's center, her movements methodical, and began sorting the small supplies they carried. Her face was composed, almost serene, but her eyes missed nothing: the subtle slope of the ground, the faint traces of wind through the ridges, the distant echo of the valley beyond. The late afternoon light faded into a quiet twilight. The girl's hands rested in her lap, eyes heavy with fatigue but alert. The warriors' breaths were ragged but steady. The shaman arranged their simple camp, each action measured, purposeful, without a word wasted. Night settled over the hollow. The valley outside was muted, the world holding its breath, waiting. Within the cave, 3 fragile figures prepared to endure the darkness, each aware that survival demanded patience, vigilance, and endurance without revealing the powers that would one day shape them. Darkness settled over the hollow, thickening as the last light of the sun faded behind the hills. The cave offered shelter, but little comfort. Rocks pressed against knees and shoulders, the warrior's muscles hurt in every movement, and the girl's body ached from constant vigilance. The air smelled faintly of earth and dry leaves, carrying a chill that seeped into their bones. The shaman moved deliberately among them, adjusting small details of their makeshift camp, shifting a bundle of herbs, arranging the stones for a fire, flattening the leaves where the warrior might rest. Her movements were quiet, almost ceremonial, as though even the smallest task demanded respect. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Notice the wind," she said, gesturing toward the mouth of the hollow. "It carries more than air. The way it shifts tells you where danger could come. The world leaves signs if you pay attention." The girl crouched nearby, her eyes wide but attentive. "How can you know that?" she asked. "Experience," the shaman replied simply. "And patience. Survival is not strength alone. It is seeing what others do not and understanding what must be done before it is too late." The warrior watched silently, wincing as he shifted his weight to ease the ache in his chest. His body protested even the smallest movements, but his mind, foggy from exhaustion, started to pick up the nuances of the cave, the way the shadows moved, the faint hiss of wind through the ridge above, the subtle rustle of small animals far outside. The shaman knelt beside the fire pit, arranging kindling and small stones. She glanced at the warrior, her gaze calm but searching, as if probing for traces of his past, trying to read him without words. "Tell me what you remember," she said softly, not pressing, just offering the opportunity. He hesitated, eyes flicking to hers. Nothing came. Memories were broken, scattered. Only a vague sense of wandering, of being forced into the battlefield against his will. He shook his head slightly at the gesture, enough to convey the truth. "Then we begin where you are," she said, nodding once. "The rest will come in time. First, survival. Second, understanding." The girl listened, crouched near the small fire. Her mistrust of the warrior remained, but she began to see him not as a stranger to fear, but as someone fragile and necessary. Slowly, reluctantly, she began to ask questions about the forest, about how to read the signs of danger, how to know when water was safe to drink, how to move quietly without alerting those who might follow. The shaman answered patiently, demonstrating without display, guiding the girl's hands over rocks and sticks, showing how to build a fire without smoke, how to keep it controlled, how to use shadows to move unseen. The warrior watched, absorbing small lessons in silence, feeling something stir within him, a faint awareness of himself in the world, of his place among the living, even while his past remained lost. Night deepened and the hollow grew colder. The girl finally curled into a tight bundle, eyes heavy with exhaustion. The warrior lay flat on the ground, muscles aching, mind restless but quietly absorbing. The shaman remained awake, silent, listening to the wind, reading the faint signs of movement outside. Her gaze occasionally flicked to the 2 sleeping figures, as if guarding not just their bodies but the fragile threads of trust beginning to form between them. The world outside was harsh, unpredictable, and chaotic. But here, in the small hollow under the ridge, survival began not with power, not with magic, but with awareness, patience, and the quiet insistence to endure. Dawn crept over the ridge, pale light spilling into the hollow. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and dry leaves. Shadows retreated slowly, revealing the rough contours of the rocks and the sparse brush outside. The warrior stirred first, his eyes fluttering open, heavy and uncertain. Pain ran through him with every movement, yet he forced himself to sit up slightly, wincing as his chest and arms reminded him of the previous day's agony. He felt the shift in energy ran the hollow, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it stirred something within him, awareness. The girl was awake, sitting near the fire pit she had made the night before. She had not slept deeply, her small frame tense with vigilance. When she noticed the warrior stirring, she froze, unsure what to expect. Her eyes narrowed slightly, wary. Despite his weakness, she instinctively measured him, trying to discern whether he was friend or threat. The shaman moved silently, adjusting the stones around the fire to catch the first warmth of the rising sun. She did not speak immediately, allowing the quiet of the morning to settle over them. Finally, she addressed the warrior, her voice calm but firm. "You are awake," she observed. "Good. We cannot linger here. The valley below will not remain empty for long. You must walk slowly, carefully." The warrior nodded faintly, still unable to speak clearly. Every movement was deliberate, a negotiation with pain. His mind, though foggy, began to piece together fragments of understanding. They were in a hostile land, survival depended on vigilance, and the shaman, though enigmatic, was guiding them with purpose. The girl finally spoke, her voice cautious. You need to keep up. We can't stop here." Her mistrust was clear, but there was an edge of concern beneath it. She shifted her pack and stepped slightly closer to observe him. The shaman glanced at her briefly, then back to the warrior. "We move at the pace we can maintain, no faster, but we move. There's no other choice." The warrior rose carefully, testing his limbs. Pain flared sharply, but he forced himself to take the first step out of the hollow, supported only by his own resolve. The girl watched silently, her eyes sharp and calculating, while the shaman moved alongside the path, scanning the ridges and forests for signs of danger. The morning air was still and tense. Every sound of the distant call of a bird, the rustle of wind through dry leaves, felt magnified. The valley waited, indifferent yet threatening, and the three of them moved forward, fragile but determined, their steps measured against the quiet chaos of the land. They descended slowly from the hollow, the warrior's pace halting and uneven. Each step drew a grimace from him, yet he forced himself onward. Pain and exhaustion slowed them, but stopping entirely was impossible. The valley below promised no mercy for the weak or slow. The girl walked slightly ahead, keeping her pack low and her eyes sharp. She scanned the slopes and shadows, anticipating danger in every movement of the forest. Fear still clung to her, but she no longer questioned the necessity of moving with the warrior. Her vigilance was a shield, her caution a silent promise she would not fail. The shaman observed them both, quiet and measured. "The world is not forgiving," she said softly, more to herself than to them. "Those who survive do so by seeing the truth. There is no good or evil beyond survival, only action, and the consequences it brings." The warrior tried to focus, each breath painful, each step deliberate. He felt the subtle rhythm of the land, the faint hum of lingering spirits from the battlefield, the invisible threads of life and death that stretched across the valley. Though he could not fully comprehend it, he understood instinctively the land remembered, and the living must respect its memory. The girl shifted her weight, watching him. "Why did they leave you?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. The warrior's eyes flicked toward her, but he could not answer. Memory remained a blur, fragmented and unreliable. He only knew he had been forced into war, that death had pursued him, and that now, in this fragile dawn, survival depended on every careful step. The shaman's voice cut softly through the tense morning. "We move because we must. There is no safety in waiting, no mercy in stillness. The weak are claimed by the world, and those who hesitate are forgotten." The warrior nodded, forcing himself to take another step. Pain racked his body, but the necessity of movement anchored him. Behind him, the girl adjusted her pack, ready to respond, ready to protect or flee if needed. Above them, the sun rose high, spilling muted light across the valley. Shadows shifted, the wind whispered through the trees, and the three of them pressed onward, fragile, wary, and bound by the quiet imperative to survive in a world that offered neither mercy nor certainty. End of chapter.